General Hospital spoilers for Monday, July 21st reveal that Porsche had once taken pride in her discipline, her integrity. And the lines she never crossed, the lines she believed defined her as a physician, a mother, and a woman of ethics in a world increasingly shaped by lies. But somewhere between pressure and persuasion, those lines blurred. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, almost surgical. Drew had approached her carefully. His words threaded with concern and masked by the illusion of care. He didn't demand, he reasoned. He didn't threaten, he rationalized. He told her it was a temporary adjustment. A protective measure to shield Michael from scrutiny, to shield the family from public scandal, to give them space to heal. At first, Porsche resisted. She knew what it meant to alter medical files. To tamper with results that were supposed to reflect truth and life and trust. But Drew spoke in hypotheticals that felt safe, in scenarios that made her second-guess her instincts. And one day, with her back to the door and her hands trembling on the keyboard, she did it. She changed Michael's test results. What was meant to be a small, almost invisible correction turned into something much darker. The falsified data led to a misinterpretation of Michael's underlying condition, one that required immediate intervention. Porsche had believed that by quietly adjusting the results, she could keep the situation controlled. She didn't expect the attending physician to respond so aggressively to the false diagnosis. Prescribing Michael a strong regimen of opioid-based medication to treat a pain that didn't exist. And she never imagined Michael, someone she had always viewed as composed and careful, would follow the treatment blindly, trusting the professionals, trusting her. But that trust was a weapon now, a silent poison. And it began to take effect almost immediately. Within days, Michael was taking more than he needed. Within weeks, he had grown dependent. His movements became slower, his reactions more delayed, his tone clipped and erratic. He brushed it off as stress. Everyone did at first. But Porsche saw the signs before anyone else, the subtle twitches in his hands, the moments he forgot appointments. The long silences that filled conversations that once flowed easily. He began requesting early refills, growing agitated when he couldn't get them. He stopped sleeping, started snapping at Willow. Avoiding eye contact, withdrawing from his son. The man who had once commanded a boardroom with quiet strength was slipping away, piece by piece, under a haze of medication that had no medical purpose. And the deeper he fell, the more Porsche realized that this wasn't just about one altered report, it was about an obsession with control. Drew had said it would end quickly. He promised the adjustment would be reversed once the immediate crisis passed. But it didn't. The longer the lie held, the more Drew found reasons to sustain it. And as Michael's condition worsened, Drew grew colder, more calculated, like he was watching not a man collapse, but a variable shift in his favor. Porsche started asking questions again. She suggested correcting the file, coming clean, resetting the treatment plan. But Drew told her it was too late, that the fallout would destroy Michael's reputation and hers. That the best thing for everyone was to stay the course and increase monitoring. She began to suspect that Drew didn't care about Michael's health at all, only about how the lie insulated his own secrets. What terrified Porsche most wasn't just what she had done, but how the system around her had responded. The doctors treating Michael didn't question the results. The pharmacy didn't hesitate to fill the prescriptions. The family, too distracted by other crises, didn't notice the changes in his behavior until it was too late. Michael had become invisible, a victim of a lie no one else could see. And Porsche was the only one who understood how far the damage had gone. She began secretly logging his behavior, tracking his symptoms, documenting every deviation. She hoped that, if nothing else, she could at least build a map to lead him back. But as the days passed, the map darkened. Michael wasn't just medicated, he was addicted. And worse, he didn't know it. He believed in the treatment. Believed in the diagnosis. Believed that the pain he felt was real, even though it had been created by falsified data. He trusted the system. He trusted her. And Porsche knew that the moment the truth came out, if it ever did, he would never forgive her. No one would. But guilt had become irrelevant. She was in too deep. Every time she opened his file, every time she pretended nothing had changed, she was reinforcing the lie that was eating him alive. And now she couldn't sleep. She couldn't breathe. The weight of the deception had become a second skin, and even Isaiah had begun to notice the strain in her voice, the way her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. But what haunted Porsche more than anything was the silence. The silence of everyone pretending things were normal. The silence of Drew, still manipulating outcomes from behind the scenes. The silence of Curtis, too consumed by his own obsessions to see what was happening right in front of him. And the silence of Michael, whose descent was slow but steady. Whose soul was dimming like a light starved of oxygen. Porsche knew the clock was ticking. There would come a moment when Michael would cross a line, a medical emergency, an overdose. A breakdown, and when that happened, the entire lie would unravel. But by then, it might be too late. And in the quiet, cold corners of her mind, Porsche began to fear a question she could no longer suppress. What if that had been Drew's plan all along? What if Michael wasn't just collateral damage? What if he had always been the target? Porsche had no proof. Only instinct. But instinct was what had failed her in the first place, and now, it was the only thing she had left. So she continued the charade. Pretending to be the caring doctor. Pretending to be in control. Pretending the lie hadn't become larger than she ever imagined. But the truth was undeniable. Michael was no longer sick. He was poisoned. And Porsche, no matter how much she tried to justify it, had handed him the first dose. Jason had never been a man to dwell on emotion. Never the type to let longing twist his focus or let the past cloud his judgment, but lately, everything around him had begun to shift. People saw it in the way he stood still just a little longer than necessary, in the way his eyes drifted toward the harbor like he was waiting for something, or someone. The weight of silence had begun to build around him, and Carly, as always, noticed it first. Their connection was forged through war, loss, loyalty, and a history too deep to ever fully unpack. But Carly didn't need words to see the truth unraveling inside Jason. He wasn't just remembering Britt, he was anticipating her. And the difference between grief and expectation was written in every subtle action he made. For a long time, Jason had buried the ache of Britt's so-called death beneath layers of duty. Allowing others to believe he had moved on, that he had accepted what the WSB and the hospital reports claimed, that he had let go. But the truth had always been more complicated. He never saw the body. He never heard her final words. He never received that conclusive silence that came when something truly ended. And for Jason, who understood death better than most, that ambiguity wasn't closure, it was a doorway. And he had never stopped standing in it. What Carly didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jason had quietly restarted his own investigation. Separate from Sonny, separate from Spinelli, digging into WSB transfers, encrypted messages, and unlisted movement logs in and out of Eastern Europe from the time of Britt's disappearance. The more he looked, the more inconsistencies he found, surveillance gaps, classified shipments, medical research moved under different names. There was no single smoking gun, but there was a pattern. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase her. And Jason, methodically and silently, began to reverse every piece of that cover-up. He didn't share this with Carly at first. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he knew she'd see the obsession in his eyes and try to pull him back to the present, to the chaos already surrounding them. To the demands of Sonny's fractured empire and the pressure of Michael's spiraling health and Drew's tightening grip over GH. But Jason couldn't be pulled back. Because if Britt was out there, if even the smallest chance existed that she had survived, then everything else could wait. His loyalty to Carly had always been unshakable. And yet even she could feel the shift. She confronted him in the warehouse one night, her voice low, not angry but worn, asking him where his head had gone, what he was chasing in the shadows. He didn't answer directly. Jason rarely did. But in his silence, she heard everything. And in her heart, she already knew the name haunting him. Britt. The one woman who had broken through his walls not by trying to save him, but by understanding him without apology. Her disappearance had shattered him in ways he had never admitted, not to Carly. Not to Sonny, not even to himself. And now, the growing possibility of her return wasn't just bringing him hope, it was igniting something dangerous inside him. Jason was a man of action, of war. And if Britt was alive, someone had taken her. Someone had hidden her. And someone was going to pay for it. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered fragments of a plan that extended far beyond a single agent's disappearance. Britt had been working on something secret in the weeks before she vanished, something connected to classified gene therapy trials, WSB-endorsed biological encryption. And a patient list that included names Jason recognized from the darkest corners of his past. She wasn't just missing. She had known too much. And that made her not just a target, but a threat. Carly began to understand the scale of what was happening when Jason stopped reporting back, when he began operating in total silence. Shutting down anyone who tried to pull him into the day-to-day dysfunction of Port Charles. He was pulling away not because he had lost his grip, but because he had finally found a purpose that mattered more than all the others. Britt's return, if it happened, wouldn't be a quiet reappearance. It would be a detonation. And Jason was preparing for the fallout. Carly watched him with something more complicated than jealousy. It was fear. Because she knew what it meant for Jason to go all in. He would tear through the WSB if he had to. He would put his life on the line. He would walk straight into the fire. And if Britt didn't come back, if it all ended in ashes, Carly wasn't sure he'd come back either. Not the same. Not whole. Because he had already tied his heart, his mind, his every move to the hope of her survival. And when Jason Morgan believes someone he loves is still alive, there is no force on earth that can stop him. Not logic. Not grief. Not even Carly. The streets of Port Charles buzzed with chaos, Michael's altered files, Drew's manipulations, Jocelyn's hidden agenda, but none of that mattered to Jason anymore. Not until he knew the truth. Not until he saw Britt with his own eyes. And with every night that passed, with every file decrypted, every whisper intercepted, the pressure rose. Because if she was alive, he would find her. And if she wasn't, then someone had to pay for making him believe she was. The moment was coming. The fuse was lit. And Jason, once again, was preparing to burn for the one woman he never stopped loving. Willow had always carried a quiet ache for peace, a fragile, impossible dream buried beneath years of medical trauma, loss, and the relentless battles she'd been forced to fight. But now, standing in the growing silence of her own uncertainty, she was beginning to feel a new kind of urgency building inside her. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was something sharper. Determination. A fierce, maternal fire that refused to die, no matter how many times the world had tried to dim it. And at the center of that fire was Wiley, the boy who had once been taken from her, the child she still dreamed about every night, the piece of her heart who existed just beyond her reach. Wiley. And now Amelia, represented everything Willow had nearly died protecting. And no matter how composed she seemed, no matter how often she smiled for the sake of others, there was a storm rising inside her. She was ready to fight again. But this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. Drew had stepped in at a moment when Willow wasn't even sure she had the strength left to stand. He saw what others refused to see, that her heart was breaking quietly. That every moment she was denied time with Wiley was another thread unraveling in her soul. While others offered sympathy, Drew offered strategy. And it was working. He had begun manipulating the legal field in her favor, leveraging connections, challenging paperwork, finding cracks in the current guardianship arrangement that others had missed or ignored. He wasn't just giving Willow hope. He was building her a path forward, one that could eventually lead to full legal custody of both Wiley and Amelia. And for Willow, who had spent so long being pulled by forces outside her control. The thought of reclaiming even one corner of her life sent a pulse of strength through her veins that she hadn't felt in months. This wasn't just about shared parenting rights. It was about dignity. About ownership of the life that had been stolen piece by tragedy, manipulation, and grief. Willow wasn't naive. She knew Michael's world had grown colder, more secretive. His choices lately had mirrored Drew's darker instincts, and as his emotional distance grew, so too did the wall between them. But Drew, curiously, had become the bridge. Whether out of guilt, strategy, or his own strange sense of redemption. He was now the one fighting hardest for Willow's place as a mother, even as Michael slipped deeper into confusion, chronic pain, and quiet isolation. Willow began spending more time preparing. Attending every court briefing, studying past cases, keeping records of every visit she was allowed with Wiley. Her maternal instincts had always been strong, but now they were sharpened into purpose. She kept notes on Wiley's emotional reactions, his words, the way he reached for her and never wanted to let go. She paid attention to Amelia's behavioral shifts. The way she clung tighter in her arms, the subtle changes that only a mother could see. These weren't just moments. They were evidence. And Willow, who once trembled at the thought of confrontation, was now steel beneath the softness. Drew saw it too. And it only made him double down. He began planting suggestions with his legal team, not just to argue Willow's right to be more present, but to imply that Michael's increasing dependency on pain medication, even if still under a doctor's care, could one day jeopardize his reliability as a sole parent. It was subtle. Unprovable, but it was enough. The court system, ever watchful of future threats, began to shift slightly in Willow's favor. And though Willow never explicitly sanctioned that particular angle, she didn't stop it either. Because in her mind, this wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about restoring balance. Reclaiming motherhood. Protecting her children. Behind closed doors. This legal shift was already causing tremors. Carly had begun asking questions, sensing the tectonic plate between Willow and Michael shifting. Nina, ever perceptive, had begun offering quiet support. Even when her own position was still tenuous. And while Michael remained unaware of just how far things had moved, Drew kept a careful hand on the controls. Managing every piece of the puzzle with calculated precision. What no one realized yet, not even Willow, was that this wasn't just about custody. This was about transformation. About a woman who had been broken too many times finally rising from the ashes with something dangerous, clarity. The quiet schoolteacher, the leukemia patient. The soft-spoken voice in the background, she was gone. What remained was a mother with nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. A woman with Drew as her strategist, her silent general. And as the legal battle built behind the scenes, as family alliances began to crack under the strain of loyalty and buried resentment, one thing became devastatingly clear. Willow wasn't waiting anymore. She was moving. And this time, no one, not even Michael, could stop her from becoming exactly what she was always meant to be, the mother her children needed. The protector they had been denied, and the calm before a storm no one in Port Charles saw coming. Liesel had spent years building walls, not just around herself, but around the truths she swore she would never allow to see daylight. She had buried secrets so deeply that even she had learned how to forget them. But secrets don't stay dead in Port Charles. They pulse, they echo, and eventually, they rise. And now, they were rising fast, fueled by her long overdue conversations with Rocco, who was no longer the impressionable boy who had once looked up to her as a quirky, mysterious relative, but a young man capable of reading between silences and sensing the gravity in her hesitation. He had come to her not out of suspicion, but out of a need for clarity. But what he uncovered, what she had feared he might someday demand, was far darker than anything he expected. Liesel had finally begun to talk. She had opened the vault, one sentence at a time, unraveling threads she had once sworn to guard forever. And at the center of it all, was Britt. Britt's legacy had always been one of contradiction: a brilliant doctor, a woman capable of breathtaking cruelty and unparalleled kindness. Someone who could commit medical crimes with clinical precision yet love with aching sincerity. Liesel had spent most of Britt's life trying to manage the chaos she created, justifying the unjustifiable because it had been born of desperation, loneliness, and a lifetime of feeling othered. But even Liesel had limits. And the secret she had held closest, the one she never allowed even Britt to fully understand, was now surfacing with dangerous force. Rocco had discovered a set of encrypted files buried in an old storage locker that had once belonged to Britt. He had assumed it was medical data, outdated research. But what he found instead were confidential records about a series of illegal embryo transfers, experimental gene mapping, and falsified WSB patient IDs. It was all there. The fingerprints of a woman who had spent her last years walking a line between scientific genius and moral collapse. Rocco was furious. Not just at Britt, but at Liesel. For withholding. For lying. For making him believe their family's story had already been told, when in reality, the worst chapters were still hidden. His anger wasn't just emotional, it was existential. Because in those files were names of people he knew, people in Port Charles who might be living lies crafted by Britt's experiments. There was even speculation in one document that someone he had grown up around might have been created through one of her unauthorized trials. The truth hit him like fire, and he couldn't contain it. He exploded, not physically, but psychologically. His faith in the people around him crumbled. And Liesel, who had always feared this moment, could only watch as the damage unfolded. She tried to explain, to contextualize Britt's actions, to beg Rocco to understand that Britt had been a victim of her own upbringing, shaped by men like Faison. Driven by the impossible desire to matter in a world that had always judged her. But it wasn't enough. Rocco didn't want explanations. He wanted accountability. And for the first time in her life, Liesel had none to offer. Because the truth was simple and inescapable, Britt had broken something that couldn't be fixed, and Liesel had helped cover it up. The fallout was immediate. Rocco stopped speaking to her. He began looking into the names on the files himself, digging deeper into the WSB's hidden archives, calling in favors from Jason's old contacts. Even contacting Spinelli for help tracing medical records. His obsession grew by the day. He wasn't just angry now, he was consumed. The need to know the full extent of what Britt had done. And what Liesel had hidden, overtook everything else in his life. And Liesel, watching him spiral, realized with crushing clarity that she had passed her own obsession down to him like a disease. Her need to protect, to control the narrative, to decide who got to know the truth, all of it had been inherited. And now, it was devouring the one person she had tried to keep safe from it all. But the worst part was still to come. Because in her effort to suppress Britt's secrets, Liesel had missed one. A file she thought was deleted. A genetic sequence tied to a patient currently living in Port Charles. A child who was never supposed to exist. And now, Rocco had found it. And he knew who the child was. And that truth, that explosive, impossible truth, would change everything. Liesel's heart sank when she saw the look in Rocco's eyes. The devastation. The rage. The betrayal. She knew in that moment that her time as protector, as gatekeeper, as mother figure, was over. Rocco wasn't coming to her for guidance anymore. He was coming for answers. And if he didn't get them, he would burn every lie to the ground until only the truth remained. This wasn't just about Britt anymore. This was about legacy. About the damage caused by generations of secrets. About how love twisted by obsession could rot from the inside out. Liesel had always believed she could control the damage. But now, the damage had a name. A face. A fury. And it was Rocco. And she knew, deep in her bones, that the storm he was about to unleash wouldn't just reveal the past, it would rewrite the future. For everyone.